ESPN FC live on a Sunday. The final whistle has just gone at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea 0, Manchester City 2. Mark Donaldson alongside Janusz Michallik. How did Manchester City perform today, Janusz, in their 2-0 win?
What a game. I really don't know what to say about this game, to be quite honest, because I mean, it had to be the worst game of the round. We still have, one left tomorrow, so I can't imagine it's going to be any worse. But it just seems to me that Manchester City were in cruise control without having to be very good, right? I mean, that's the way I looked at it. You look at Chelsea squad that for the most part, I mean, it was the strongest team you could say, right? Reece James, I suppose, when healthy, he'd be in that lineup. And you're talking about Manchester City that were missing players like Stones and Walker, Foden, obviously not in the starting 11. Rodri, which is such a big piece of that team, as always. You could also make a case that they play without Kevin De Bruyne because he didn't really play well, didn't really have to. Even Bernardo Silva, although better than De Bruyne, nowhere near their best. So I think if you're Manchester City and you have such a tough assignment, knowing that all the big teams have won already, you're going to Stamford Bridge, it couldn't have been any easier, I suppose.
Do you look at the Chelsea performance and think it was as good as Manchester City allowed them to be, or did you expect more with the players they have and the money that they have spent?
Well, of course. I mean, look, I mean, it's going to be difficult to be successful under this management. Amongst all the we have to remember that amongst the chaos, there's a good team in there in Chelsea, right? I mean, if you look at 14, 15, 16 players, there's a good team, and it's just a question of putting this puzzle together. And it's always difficult in the beginning of the season. We all know that. It's a built-in excuse for everybody that you're not going to find the rhythm. And as I've said, if you look at Chelsea, or at least with Manchester City, I mean, they weren't high pressing today because they're probably physically not ready to do that just yet. Not with this squad. You have to work yourself in the middle during the season in the first 2 or 3 games. I mean, I was surprised by that, right? They dropped off. They let Chelsea have the ball and say, "What have you got?" And it turned out that they didn't have much. There were moments for Chelsea. Obviously, Nicholas Jackson, that offside goal, as the commentary said, he needs to be smart in that. He can't be in an offside position looking across the line. He had that, massive chance from 5 yards out, straight at Ederson. I'm not saying it was absolutely easy because it was coming over his shoulder, Mark, but I mean, he's got to put that away. So there were a few moments, but just still lacking energy, lacking an idea, lacking an identity, which has to be so hard for Maresca, right? I mean, I think he'd want to have 24, 25 players where he can put in his ideas and concentrate on tactics and on little details. And he has to deal with such a big squad. When Renato, I honestly, I'm telling you, when Renato Vega came in, I had to look him up. And, you'd think that we have to know everything. But with the amount of players, I've missed it that he was there. Obviously, he's not a big name. Portuguese youth international. It turns out under 21 that came from Basel. I had zero idea. When I was looking at him, on the sideline, I'm saying, really, who is that? With no disrespect, by the way. I just mean it. I've lost track of all the players. And I mean, this was Chelsea with zero energy, massive game against Manchester City. We remember the game last season, 4-4. Mark, I mean, you watched that game. The game in Columbus was much better, wasn't it? At least it had goals.
City were as good as they needed to be, and they were very comfortable. It reminded me of kind of the big brother or the big sister, just keeping the little brother or the little sister at arm's length. They always kind of had control. That's going to be one of City's tougher games this season. It's going to be a tough game for anybody that goes to Stamford Bridge. What does it say about Manchester City, the way that they were able to handle that game so comfortably?
Well, again, I mean, they're favorites. If you put aside the fact, the unknown with the 115 charges and some decision is going to come, they're the favorites to win it. Not based on this game, although this game tells you a lot that City, with this team, with this starting 11, at this stage of the season where they're still recovering players, already got a very, very important 3 points, right? I mean, this was the biggest of them all. If you look at Arsenal and Liverpool, I think all those games were winnable. And one question mark, the toughest opponent was for Manchester City, and that was Chelsea away from home. So I look at that. Everybody's asking, and how do they find motivation? I think, there's a culture of winning, which is important. If you look at Pep Guardiola, he treats every game like it's a final. Even when you look at him on the sideline, I think he demands that. Anybody that comes short of that will not have a place in this team. So I don't buy this motivation. I saw that second goal and the reaction of the players afterwards. Not that I expected them to be sad, Mark, but I mean, you can tell it. These players want to win it. They'll manage through the season as they always do. And comes the important part of the season when trophies are on the line. I don't care how many trophies you've won. You always want to be the best. You always want to win it. So, kudos to Manchester City. Not being great, didn't have to be great. And, when it comes to Chelsea, again, if you Maresca, I mean, it's like throwing every manager under the bus, right? So here's deal with it somehow. I just don't understand it. Although I do think that there's enough good players for Chelsea to have a more successful season than they did last year.
Suppose, I mean, even Raheem Sterling complaining he didn't get a game, that's like a bingo number, complaining that it wasn't picked all the time. That's an argument for another day, and Raheem Sterling obviously wasn't happy. You were speaking about Renato Vega getting a spot on the bench who was eventually used. But this is just getting into the minutiae. What I want to talk about before we get into specific individuals in each side is the two goals. Okay, the first one started off 18th minute. Doku played the ball inside. Him and Savinho kind of swapping sides in the opening 25 minutes. So Doku plays it inside. Bernardo gets the flick. It's Fofana who's playing Bernardo onside. And Haaland does well. Good strength, gets the finish. What would please Pep Guardiola about that goal? And what would frustrate Enzo Maresca about the concession of that goal?
Well, for Pep Guardiola, as you've said it, I mean, it happened just maybe a minute before that, where Doku switched sides with Savio, and Doku had a very, very tough time just before that with Cucurella. I mean, he was trying everything. Cucurella had him in his pocket. So when that switched, obviously he felt more comfortable in that position. I'm talking about Doku bringing that ball in. I still think there's a little bit of luck on that Bernardo Silva flick, right? It was played behind him. I can't imagine that he really wanted to flick it because he knew there was a player in behind. So, that's the positive. In terms of Chelsea and the negative, and obviously positive, Erling Haaland off to a good start again, just like he did last season. He did that a little bit earlier in the game. So that's the positives for Manchester City. For Chelsea, again, I mean, defensively, they're poor. When you talk about the midfield, Lavia, probably the only player that I felt did well. Caicedo, I think that would be concerned because he was lazy, by the way, on both goals. Because when Doku started to bring the ball inside, he was the one that just basically let him go. And he did that with Kovacic, if you remember, in the end. Initially, it was Caicedo. So that's an issue because we've talked about the protection or lack of protection by Chelsea midfield last season. And that's why they conceded so many goals, especially in transition. And here we are again. Enzo, indifferent, nothing special from him. As I've said, Lavia probably the best of the three, but that would be a massive concern. I'm not sure who you said kept him on side, but I think it was Colwill next to Haaland.
It was Fofana who was playing Bernardo on side.
Right, but it was Colwill, I think, that had Haaland initially. That flick obviously didn't help him, but I think he was in the wrong position to begin with, flick or not.
6 minutes before the end, and it was 2. And you've just spoken about Chelsea's defensive deficiencies. What a mess this was. Robert Sanchez playing it out, and it wasn't great by Fofana. It's a clearance towards halfway, but Kovacic is still 50 yards from goal, and he's able to run, 25 of that unchallenged. And then the goalkeeper, I mean, he's got like wet tissue paper for wrists there, Robert Sanchez. Great finish by Kovacic after a run, but come on, Chelsea, you've got to be better than that.
But that's what I just mentioned. With Caicedo, I mean, he's got a foul there. Enzo was a little bit late, but he still had an opportunity to play. I mean, that was an issue with. Mark, look at this Chelsea team right now, and we talk about leadership, because it's such an easy thing to go to. But there's a difference between leadership and character. Did you see any sort of character from Chelsea? If I had to tell you, show me a player like even, Rodri or Bernardo Silva or Kevin De Bruyne. Well, I don't know if Kevin De Bruyne is always the best example, but if you look at every Premier League team or any team, there's always 3 or 4 players that have that something special. When things don't go well, when you need a little bit of extra energy, when you need that unbelievable tackle just to wake the team up, there's nothing there. I mean, okay, these are young guys, but that's by choice, right? You bring in all these players. And right now, if I look at it, of course, I don't know these guys personally. I don't know how they are on the pitch or in the training ground. But I tell you what, watching them tells you a lot. You tell me one player with a character, right? Even Cole Palmer. I mean, you saw those pictures on the boat, right? He looked like he was still on it, by the way, during this game. And I don't know if I want to go to him because he was such an important player. And just like at Manchester City, the players that are not ready for the season just yet. But, if you throw him out there, then you have an expectation. But that's an issue for Chelsea. Defensively, as a team, the character of the team, that midfield for me is still lazy. When you add players, and I'll say it, like Cole Palmer and Nkunku, I mean, they don't give you much defensively anyway. Now, if Cole Palmer continues to score like he did last season and contribute, you can close your eyes on that, right? And Nkunku looked physically well, but didn't really do anything in the game apart from, maybe 2 or 3 decent actions, and he was taken off early. So that's an issue for me. But I feel for Maresca. I do. Every manager knows that, right? You just want to know your team. You want to implement your ideas. You want to work with a smaller group of players. And here we are. I mean, I can't even imagine what that training is, because for a manager, it's very difficult to look at players in the eye, isn't it, Mark? Right? I mean, think about it. You have to make he says, hey, we get paid a lot of money. I think he said that about Sterling, that he had to make a tough decision. That's what he's getting paid for. Yeah. But that's easier said than done. And I'm sure Maresca now comes to training. He sees 40 players, Mark. And, even as a player, you're a person, you kind of say, hey, these guys aren't even in the stands.
Of course. I want to end with focusing on individuals, 2 from each side. And I kind of touched on Robert Sanchez. How on earth is he deemed Chelsea's number 1 right now, when he was a guy who was deemed surplus to requirements at Brighton, obviously got hurt, didn't end last season as the number 1. They've spent 20-odd million on Philip Jurgensen, who was on the bench. Knowing what having seen Robert Sanchez as often as you have, is it a matter of time before he's usurped as Chelsea's number 1 by Jurgensen?
I don't think it was terrible today, right?
No, but come on, you spend all that money and you bring goalkeepers in, and you're still playing guys that Brighton thought wasn't good enough to play for them. Come on now,
right? Well, they've got 8 of them, right? Exactly. So I don't know. I mean, if that's not good enough, they certainly have enough goalkeepers to go to, I suppose. But I don't know if he's the first player that I go to today. Now, granted,
there's 2 players on each side I want to talk about, and he's one of them. Does he deserve to be Chelsea's number 1?
Well, Jorgensen is there, right? So we'll see. At the moment, I think he does, because he's been there for a while. He was injured, right? And I think at this moment, the jury's out. But again, I'm not the one that's going to go to Robert Sanchez at this moment. For me, he has to play himself out.
Okay. The other player from Chelsea before we got into Manchester City, Nico Jackson. Now, you and I both saw him at Villarreal. He was more of a forward coming in from the left-hand side. They've kind of tried to make him into a striker at Chelsea. They signed Mark Guehi, probably on the back of scoring on his debut in a game I commentated on against Athletic Bilbao. Good player, but come on, if that's the best that they can do as a replacement for Nico Jackson, it just seems they've got so much money and they're just spending it on the wrong players. What about Nico Jackson? What's your thoughts on him as the man who's supposedly tasked with leading the line? Because he did all right as far as goals are concerned last season, but today he wasn't great.
Yeah, but at the very least, you can say he was dangerous, right? We've mentioned already that situation where I think it was Cole Palmer that had the shot and Ederson spilt it, right? And he was in an offside position. He's got to know better because he's looking across the line, and he had a couple of chances, and mainly, the other big one was, from 5 yards out at Ederson. Although, as I said, it wasn't an absolute sitter. He continues to be dangerous, so I'll give him that. We've seen him. He's in Spain, he can play on the left-hand side. I still think he feels most comfortable when he's on the left-hand side. So they're trying to make him into number 9. We see other teams do that. Havertz was one of them. That was at Chelsea, now at Arsenal. He's getting better. So I'm willing to give Nico Jackson the benefit of the doubt. They're probably still looking. That's why the name of Osimhen is still in the rumor mill, I suppose. So that may be your answer. But I think there will be a place for Nico Jackson. So again, as I've said yesterday, and as harsh as we've been on Chelsea for the right reasons, I think this is the first game. So let's give him some time.
Yeah, and I think they'll be all right this season. I think when he gets his feet under the desk, Enzo Maresca, and realizes this is his best team, and if he can keep everybody fit, I think they'll be fine. I think they'll be challenging for European spots. Now, Manchester City, we didn't see him for 90 minutes. He got hurt and replaced at halftime. We saw a lot of him for Girona last season, part of the stable of Manchester City's kind of group of teams. What did you make of Savio, as he was known last year in La Liga, and now they're calling him Savinho, the Brazilian winger?
No, very, very good. He stood out, right? Even in the short period of time that he was there. I hope it's not much. It happened just before halftime, didn't it? And he had to come off. But he's playing actually on the side that he likes, right? Because for Girona, he mostly played on the left-hand side.
He did, yeah.
Left-hand side. And that's where he started today. And as we've mentioned, that switch was telling. They were switching all the time. Pep Guardiola made that switch. I'm assuming that's what he told him. And right away, it was Doku who felt more comfortable there on the left-hand side. So it's a player that's obviously got a little bit of pace, loves taking players on. And this is a typical Pep Guardiola type of player where you have to engage your fullback almost every time you get the ball. You don't shy away from it. And not only that, but that you know what to do with the ball. So that end product in today's game was maybe lacking a little bit, but that's a big ask, of course. His first game already in the starting 11. I think we're going to see the benefits of Savio as the season goes along. But certainly one of the best players on the pitch for as long as he was on it.
Yeah, it was a good first impression. The funny thing is, he probably wouldn't even have started if Oscar Bob hadn't been injured in training, because after the pre-season games and the way Oscar Bob played, he was likely to start. Pep Guardiola pretty much admitted that before the injury. The other player I want to talk about for Manchester City, and it's kind of, I'm cheating a little bit here. It's my game, so I'm making up the rules as I go along. It's Josep Gvardiol. Now, last season, towards the end of last season, last 3 months, you saw him bomb forward. Now, a lot of that was because Kyle Walker was on the other side. But in pre-season, where they did exactly the same, when they're in possession, it's 3 at the back and 1 fullback moves into midfield. When they have lost the ball, it becomes a back 4. So with Gvardiol, we saw him get forward a little bit today. But when Rico Lewis plays on the right-hand side, he seems to be the one that's getting forward a little bit more. But they've got themselves a star in Gvardiol. How did you think of his performance today, and do you agree that he's going to get more license to get forward when Kyle Walker is the opposite fullback on the other side rather than Rico Lewis?
That may be the case, although today I think it was a conscious decision by Pep Guardiola because when you have Cole Palmer on that side and Malo Gusto, who always goes forward, right? No matter what the game and no matter what the opponent, I think, when you have a situation like this where Rico Lewis needs to come inside, because without Rodri, it's a little bit different, right? And obviously Kovacic, for the most part, was playing that lone position number 6, with, of course, Rico Lewis being tasked with coming inside. So I think given the fact that Rico Lewis was playing today, not Kyle Walker, he was coming inside, and what he had to deal with on his side, I think it's a conscious decision, not a decision made by the way the game was played out, not a decision made by Gvardiol. I think it was a decision of the coaching staff to keep him home just a little bit. But we've seen him in European Championships where he was playing as a center back, right? I think at least in the beginning, I think might have switched later on. It's a big man, obviously, with soft feet who can go forward, play a big role, good strike from distance, as we saw last year. What do you have, 3 or 4 goals towards the end of the season? Obviously, a good cross, very strong, big, great timing on his tackles. The typical Pep Guardiola defender, who's first and foremost excellent 1v1, big body, which like Akanji, like Ruben Dias, Pep Guardiola likes, even Nathan Ake, maybe not as big as some of the ones that I've mentioned, but yeah, we forgot about him. He was on the bench today as well. So, it almost seems like normal service resumed by Manchester City without having to be excellent or anywhere near being excellent and game fit right now. So going away to Stamford Bridge, easy 3 points. Thank you very much.
Who misses out when Rodri's available and starting again?
Now you threw.
Curveball at the end.
Was that
a wee curveball for you to deal with at the end?
Yeah, I don't know, because we've seen Rodri playing with Kovacic as well. You can go three in the back. Maybe without Rico Luis. So there's all kinds of combination. We've seen so many from Pep Guardiola. It depends on availability as well. There's always going to be those injuries. There's going to always be rotation in wide areas right now. So. Yeah, I don't think Kovacic misses out, because we've seen those two playing together.
And Bernardo's always someone that he kind of goes under the radar, but he shouldn't, because he's such a good player.
Yeah, well, last year was a lot easier. Those decisions are very often made for the manager, for Pep Guardiola, right? De Bruyne wasn't there for long periods of time. You have injuries everywhere. So, I don't think I have a straight answer. And I promise you, if you ask that question, Pep Guardiola, he'd probably struggle with that as well.
Probably. Final question before we wrap Sunday's ESPN FC live up. I'm going to allow you a mulligan here. I'm going to allow you the far too early hot take for both Chelsea and Manchester City. And if you get it wrong, then no one cares, because we've only seen such a small sample size of action, just 90 minutes for both. But after one game, give me your hottest of hot takes with no need to worry about any recompense. First of all, Chelsea.
Well, it's an easy one, right? Enzo Maresca, is he going to last till Christmas? Really, I really mean it, well, take a look at their schedule. Next 4 or 5 games, all winnable. He better win it, because after that, I think he's got everybody. United, Liverpool, Aston Villa, Newcastle. He's got just absolutely everybody. There's 5 or 6 games late September, November, that are going to decide about where Maresca is. And if you look at the management, they're going to do it because they're going to have to, because it's easy to find a scapegoat, right? With everything that's going on right now, with all the players that they have, with obviously a loss to the start, 4 or 5 games, I'm going from memory right now, that are winnable. And you never know what's winnable or what's not in the Premier League, but not the big names of the clubs. After that, it's a gauntlet thrown, and I don't know if he lasts it.
Your hottest of hot takes after 90 minutes of the season for Manchester City.
For Manchester City, I don't have a hot take. For me, they're the champions once again. They're going to win it for the 5th time, barring decisions from the Premier League when it comes to the 115 charges, right? If that comes during the season, you'd have to imagine that Chelsea are going to pay the price. What price that is, I don't know. But at the very least, they're going to be docked points. And with the way Arsenal has played last season, already with a win, obviously a steady Arsenal team, very much the same as they were last year with an additional Calafiori. So, any points docked are going to be an issue for Manchester City. So 2 scenarios, because they're obvious.
I think we've done well to get 24 minutes out of not the best game in the world, don't you?
That was absolutely terrible. We should have said that from the beginning. It was the worst game I've seen in a long, long time. It almost felt like it was preseason in the United States.
I was about to say that. It was like a continuation of the preseason tour.
In the United States, but I couldn't even say that, because it was 4-2, if you remember, in Columbus.
Yeah.
Erling Haaland with a hat trick, and at least we had goals in that game. So that game was much better than this one.
And that's the thing, having seen that in pre-season and seen the 4-4 at Stamford Bridge in November, you're thinking, yeah, this could be really tasty. And it wasn't, but City don't care. They won by 2-0, and the defence of their title, as they seek 5 in a row, is off to the perfect start. Bye for now.